When your pod first arrives at the shipping location, it's a really good idea to inspect the corners of the packaging for any shipping damage. Unwrap the pod and remove all the corner protectors. Remove contents of pod and set aside. Note that some boxes are secured by shipping straps. Ensure that these have not loosened during the shipping. If you notice damage, contact your SnapCab representative right away. Locate one of the boxes labeled Install Kit. Open it to find colored bags with the hardware you will need. Find the red bag and remove the number 2 Robertson bit. We're going to use this bit to remove the 4 D-rings inside the pod, 2 on the floor and 2 in the canopy. We're going to use the 3/8" driver bit for this. The canopy, as you can see, is actually in 2 pieces to make it easier to maneuver. It's a little lighter, easier to handle. In total, on the Meet 6s and the Meet 4s, we have a total of 10 bolts that are attached the canopy to the frame. So there's 2 on each half in the front which go into the header. And then we have 1 bolt on each front corner attached to each corner extrusion. And then we have 2 bolts that attach each rear extrusion. Keep in mind, these are not required to take out. These are bolts that attach the canopy inside the pod, so these remain intact. So go ahead and remove the bolts. Remember, there are 10 in total. So that's 4 bolts in the header and 1 in each front corner. There's also 2 in each back corner. Make sure to store these in a safe place so they don't get lost. Once the bolts are removed, step into the pod and gently push the 2 halves apart. This gives you room to lift the canopy and angle it under the frame to remove it. Make sure you're placing these safely aside. See? Lift up, angle, and out. Now let's take down these interior walls. We're going to start with the baffles first. Use the number 2 Robertson bit to unscrew the upper and lower baffles. Now the panels. We're going to start with the top side panel. Get someone to step inside the pod and steady the interior panels while you remove the 3/4" tapping screws that secure the panel to the corner extrusion. There are 8 screws for each panel. When you remove the panel, slide up and pivot the rear of the panel, then slide the front of the panel away from the front extrusion. Repeat for the other top panels. You must have someone steady the rear panel while removing the screws. They are heavy and will fall out if not secured. Repeat the process for the middle and bottom panels. Once all the panels are removed, use the same bit to remove the 3 toe kick binders. There are 2 screws on each toe kick binder, securing them to the corner extrusions. To make sure the front frame assembly doesn't get scratched, we're going to place a layer of protection on the floor. We're going to use the 9/16 wrench to remove the 4 bolts that secure the front frame assembly to the floor base. Notice how the colored paint on the bolts match the colored label sticker on the floor base. Keep this in mind for future assembly. Keep one hand on the corner extrusion to steady the front frame as you loosen the bolts. Once the bolts are out, gently lift the frame off the base and lower to the floor. If you're able to transport the complete front frame assembly to the final pod location in its intact form, do so now. If not, continue along with disassembly. To disassemble the frame, you'll need the 1/2" wrench. Remove the nuts that secure the corner extrusions to the header and the sill. There are 8 nuts in total. Gently pull the pieces apart. You may need to partially remove some of the protective film. It's wise, I usually put the 1/2" nut back onto the tenon block just to secure, make sure that they stay with the piece and they're not lost. The rear corner extrusions are removed in the same way as the front frame assembly. Use the 9/16 wrench to remove 2 bolts from each rear corner extrusion. When all the bolts are removed, gently lift and place aside. First thing, let's remove the protective 2x4 at the rear of the pod by removing the screw on each end. Next, locate the 7/16" nut driver bit. Remove the bolts securing the floor base to the shipping blocks. There are 8 bolts in total, 2 for each shipping block. Once all the bolts have been removed, have one person lift one side of the floor base while the other person moves the blocks out of the way. Lower the floor base to the floor and repeat on the other side. And there you go, the pod is fully disassembled. Now it's very easy for us to transport all the pieces to the pod's final location. Now that we're at the pod's final location, we can begin assembly. Tip the floor base onto its side so you have access to the bottom. All you have to do is screw in the seismic leveling foot. Make sure the foot base is higher than the caster so they're not in the way when you lower the floor. There's one for each corner. So the casters make everything move around really easily, but we need the floor base to remain stable in order to continue with assembly. To do this, we're simply going to lower the feet by twisting in counterclockwise direction until they're snug against the floor. See the yellow markings here? They help you match the pieces to the correct side of the pod. In this case, yellow refers to the rear of the pod. When you line up the extrusions onto the corner of the floor base, make sure your colors match. So go ahead and place your rear extrusions on the correct corners. Hand tighten the bolts only. You want to make sure that they have flexibility to accept the panels. If the front frame is still fully assembled, move on to attaching it to the floor base. Otherwise, guide the bolts through the front corner extrusion. It will center itself once you tighten, as long as you have enough room for the nut to capture the bolt. One important thing here, we want the bottom of the sill to be flush with the bottom of the corner extrusion because there will be a glass side light going into this channel. So making sure everything is flush is very important. Run your hand along the channel to make sure there are no misalignments. At this point, there should be a finger width gap in between the sill and the floor. If you need to adjust, you can loosen the bolts with a 1/2 inch wrench to tap or shift the sill into place, then tighten again. Gently pivot and lift onto the floor base and tighten the bolts. Remember to pay attention to the color coding. Again, we're only going to hand tighten the bolts here. We want all corner extrusions to have enough flexibility to accept the panels. Check your corner joints and channels once more to make sure they're still flush. Now we can reattach the interior wall of the pod, starting with the toe kick binders. So they're going to be sitting in like this. And again, we're matching the red dot on the extrusion to the red on the floor frame. We're using a 3/8 inch Robertson machine screw to secure the toe kicks to the corner extrusions. There's one screw on each side. Now we can install the panels, starting with the bottom rear. We know which panels are which and where to put them by following the sticker labels. We're going to drop the rear panel into the toe kick binder. The back panels have a groove in them on either side, and they capture this spline that runs up and down either rear corner extrusion. Before I put the second panel on, I'm just going to tack this one in place. I'm only going to put one on the top on each side. This way the extrusion can still wiggle, ensuring perpendicular alignment to the panels. Now we can put in the second rear panel. Make sure that this bottom panel and the second panel are completely flush, and it's really important that these are in perfect alignment on both sides. So that's what we were looking for. And now this way the frame will be locked into place, being perfectly perpendicular. Let's secure that placement by screwing the middle and bottom panels into the frame. The next panel we install is going to be a bottom side panel, lower onto the toe kick binder. Tack it into place, but only once in the top rear corner. Do not screw into the front extrusions yet. Now the middle side panels. See how the front end is angled into the front extrusion first? Then the rear end with the groove swings back towards the rear extrusion to capture that spline. Push down to lower onto the bottom panel. Make sure your bottom and middle panels are flush. You can make small adjustments by wiggling the panel and the frame. Alignment here is critical to make sure the whole frame is square. Once aligned, screw the middle and bottom panels to the rear extrusions only. Again, keep the front corner extrusions free. Repeat this process for the other side panels. Now for the top panels. So make sure they are flush to the middle panels before securing them to the rear corner extrusions. We've kept the front corners extrusions free so it can remain flexible when we add the canopy.
Just want to do a quick check again while you're here. Make sure that the channels are still flush with the header and the sill and not feeling any bumps. Smooth on all corners. Make sure that the panels are flush all the way down. So I want to make sure that they're all aligned properly. So these biscuits are set onto one half of the canopy top, and they'll slide into the groove, an accepting groove on the second part of the canopy. It's good to note that the rear corner that has the 2 holes, that's for the rear corner, and on the opposite side is a single hole, which means that's for the front of the canopy.
From the inside of the pod, angle one half of the canopy through the frame so it rests on the top panels. Do the same for the other panel, and when you're ready, slide them together so they connect. Make sure the biscuits are accepted into the groove. Now we can secure the canopy to the frame. Each corner extrusion has channels that capture the bolts. So that's 2 bolts in each rear corner and 1 bolt in each front corner.
And once these are attached, now we can consider the whole pod to be square.
Finish up by bolting the rest of the canopy to the front frame. Now that the canopy is bolted and the pod is square, we can secure the panels to the front extrusions. Align the lower baffles to the pre-existing holes in the bottom panel and secure with 3/4 inch Robertson tapping screws.
There's a mark on the top part of the baffle that matches with the corresponding mark on the back panel. So that just gives you the orientation as well as the right wall.
Once aligned, screw into the pre-existing holes on the bottom panel with 3/4 inch Robertson tapping screws. Simply lift off the hatch to access all the stored electrical items. Let's see. You'll find a low voltage package, a surface power unit, and a plug-and-play power cord. We'll set up the power cord first. Feed it over top of the protective skid plate and through the back of the pod. From the back of the pod, pull the plug through. Next, unwrap the low voltage package. It's got a cable that will feed power to the lights and fans, a low voltage transformer, and a short plug. We'll plug one end of this into the low voltage transformer and the other end into the power tap, which is still in the hatch. Next, we'll set up the cable for the lights and fans. Feed the cable along the back of the pod and thread it through behind the baffles under the lower interior panel. Plug it into the low voltage transformer. The other end is going to be fed through a hole just right here in the top rear panel. And pull through. Leave that cable for a moment and unwrap the surface power unit. Secure it into the hatch lid for safekeeping. If your pod doesn't have furniture, this is where it will stay. Finish by storing everything in the hatch and replacing the lid. First thing we have to do is remove the ceiling tiles from the frame.
There's a couple clips that hold the tile into the frame, and they just keep pressure on the tile. So in order to take this out, you have to compress the tile a little bit and then slide out.
Set the tiles aside and prepare to hang the ceiling frame from the canopy.
There's T-nuts in the ceiling. So we're going to take the bolt and we're going to partially thread the bolt into the T-nut in the ceiling.
Make sure you're partially threading it into the rear T-nut.
So what's going to happen with these bolts is there's a bracket on the ceiling that's going to capture those bolts. As we install the ceiling, the best approach is to come in at an angle.
Once you're inside, tilt the frame upwards so the rear bracket can capture those partially threaded bolts.
We've got magnets in the front and little flanges, and as we push it up, the magnet will capture the ceiling and hold it in place.
The next step is to make sure we've got the right distance between the ceiling frame and the rest of the pod. Because of the rear brackets, the side dimensions are pretty fixed.
But the front dimension, there's some flexibility here. It can be slide in and out, but we're hoping to get about a 1/4 inch gap in the front, about a 1/4 inch reveal. And you'll have to manage that as we tighten the bolts.
As one person loosely secures bolts into the front of the T-nut, have the other guide the front of the ceiling frame to ensure that 1/4 inch reveal. After the front bolts are fully secured, go back and tighten the rear bolts. When you finish, you should have an even 1/4 inch reveal between the front of the ceiling frame and the header. Now that the frame is in place, we can prepare the electrical for the ceiling tiles. On the middle fan, take the receiving end and plug it into the USB from the fan beside it. So now you should have 2 fans connected together. Next, unravel the cables on the middle fan and the remaining fan that has not been plugged in yet. These two USB cables will be plugged into the control box. Center tile. Lower the frame and tuck the middle cable over the side so we have room to install the middle ceiling tile.
So we enter by sliding the tile towards the back underneath the installed clips and drop it in. Take one of the USBs and plug it into one, and then the second individual one into the second unit. And that's it. So now the only thing left to do is for the power supply to power up the box. So we've already fed the power supply through the back wall, and we're going to plug it in on the side right here. And that's it. So now the unit is ready to be powered up.
Now we can plug in the pod to test out the fan and the lights. So next thing is to activate the pulley safety feature.
There's one on either side, and simply just put the cable over top of the pulley, and we're good. I should point out, so each pod is equipped with a fire suppression knockout. We actually pre-cut a hole in our tile which matches a knockout in our canopy. If the fire marshal requires you to install the fire suppression system, you're ready to go. There's no extra work involved, no modifications to the pod.
Now we can install the rest of the tiles into the ceiling frame and secure them with the clips. Prepare to install the glass side lights by removing all the protective film from the front frame. Make sure to follow the labels for proper side light orientation. There are set screws in the frame that will secure the side light, but first we need to make sure they're set back so they're not in the way. Rest the side light on the tops of your feet so you can reposition and walk into the pod. To get it into the frame, you're going to carefully push the top of the side light into the header channel, then lower it into the sill channel. Then slide it along into the extrusion channel and press to ensure it's fully captured. We have alignment tabs on the top and on the bottom of the door. So when we bring this in, we're going to open up the hinge, and we're going to line the lower tab to line up into the sill channel. So we're going to try to drive that tab right here as close to the side light as possible, and then tip the door upward into the header channel. Another note is we have what we call our filler block. This prevents the door from ever falling out. So when the block is in place, the door can no longer tip. So it's very important to put this in right after you install the door. It helps to have some spare packaging material to rest the door on as you pivot it into position. Carefully lift and guide the bottom door tab into the sill channel. Remember, try to get as close as you can to that side light. Next, gently guide the top door tab into the header channel. Snug the door up against the side light to capture the glass edge. Make sure someone is holding the door in place for these next parts. Lower the ceiling to access the header set screws. These will hold the safety filler block in place. The label indicates which way it should go. Okay, let's just pop this in. Hold it in place as you secure it with the safety screws, starting with the hinge side, then the strike side. And finally, the middle. So once this is in place, so that we're going to actually loosen on the strike side, and we're going to push the filler block right up into the top of the header, and then secure the middle bolt. It's firm, it's secure, so the door can't slide out. It's secured by that safety slot, and we have room here for us to tip in the strike post. Before we put the strike post on, we're going to take our bottom filler block, we drop it in place, and that gap is going to accept the tab on the strike post. Two tabs, bottom and top, and it's going to be the same process as with the door. We're going to insert the bottom tab, try to get as closely, if you can capture the glass first, and then swing it up into the header, and then bring it towards the side light, and then press into the side light to capture the side light completely. Now, there is a seal on the glass that you want to completely capture. So that's how far that gives you a good indicator as to where the strike post should sit. Now that's done, we can set the upper filler block into its final position. Have someone hold the door while you release the middle set screw. Let the filler block drop into place. Its edge should now rest on the strike post and is secured by the safety screws. Reposition it so it's more or less center, and just slightly snug up the middle screw. We want to prevent it from jiggling around, but we also want flexibility so we can make final adjustments to the door and side lights. This is what the set screw looks like. There are 3 on each side. Just snug them up here so they're making contact with the side light. Okay, so the screws are snug. Let's make sure the gap around the door is even.
If there's a slight difference, like we see it dropping a little bit here, that means we want to bring the side light on the bottom side inward to swing the door up.
By tightening opposite corners, you can shift the door so it sits squarely into the frame.
That looks like we have a nice even gap along the top and a reasonably even gap along the side. So at this point, we can just snug up. Don't tighten over tighten, but just simply snug up the remaining set screws.
While we're doing this, we're going to apply medium strength Loctite to prevent these set screws from loosening. Okay, now the door is perfectly aligned. Let's tighten all the header set screws. There are 5 set screws, 2 for each side light. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th is in the middle of the upper filler block. Okay, give everything a check, make sure it's tight. Nothing wiggles or shifts. And on to the next step. You'll want to vacuum out the pod before this next step. When placing the carpet, the logo should sit in the rear right corner. It's super easy. Just unroll and push towards the rear of the pod. If you don't have furniture, you'll have to modify the carpet to fit the surface power unit. Make sure everything is flat and all the corners are covered. We still have some work to do inside the pod, so lay something down to keep the carpet clean. Now for the furniture, if you have it. We're going to use these 1/2-inch pan head machine screws to attach the legs to the table. Next, attach the bracket to the wall with 3/4-inch screws. Make sure you've got the proper orientation. The larger side of the bracket will go against the wall and the thinner side will support the table. Also, the short ends of the brackets will be faced towards the middle and the long ends will be faced apart. So now that we've got proper orientation, we can go ahead and secure both of these brackets to the wall. Attaching the table is easy. Line it up with the brackets that you installed in the last step. As you are positioning the table onto the mounting brackets, slide the surface power unit behind the table and in between the 2 brackets. Make adjustments so that the pre-drilled holes in the table and the holes in the brackets line up. Loosely secure in place with 3/4-inch screws. Check out the alignment of the table. It should line up perfectly with the shadow line on the panels. When you're satisfied with the alignment, go ahead and tighten the screws. Use the 3/16-inch Allen key to remove the 4 set screws to take the door pulls apart. We're going to start with the exterior door pull. If your pod has a black finish, make sure the hole in the handle is oriented downward. Remove the washer and gasket set from the exterior door pull and remove one of the washers. Place the bolt and the gasket through one of the holes from the inside of the pod. Do the same for the other hole. And now, thread those washers back onto the bolt, sandwiching the glass in between the plastic portions. Place the exterior door pull onto the bolts and hand tighten to attach. Once the door pull is in place, use the provided bit to tighten the bolts. Now for the interior pull. Place it over the screw stems and use the Allen key to tighten. One of the last steps is installing a security feature in the ceiling. Lower the ceiling and locate the 2 safety cables. Use the standard 3/4-inch screws to secure them into the pre-drilled holes in the canopy. And that's it. Before we install the exterior panels, let's raise the seismic leveling feet so we can return mobility to the pod. Keep in mind the pod is a lot heavier than when we first lowered the feet, so we're going to use a pry bar to help take off some of the weight. It doesn't take that much effort. Just lift and spin the feet counterclockwise. That's it. Let's do that for all 4 feet.
And now, for you to move it around.
The toe kick binder is the first thing we'll install for the exterior walls.
These are going to hold out the exterior panels. So they tuck behind the front corner and the rear corner extrusion. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of slide it in on either one side and sort of drop it down on the other. And the idea is for the bottom of the toe kick binder to be flush with the bottom of the front corner extrusion and rear corner extrusions.
After the toe kick is lined properly, screw both ends into the corner extrusions. Now that we've got the toe kicks installed, we can attach the exterior panels. Here's an important note. On the rear panels only, there is a bevel on one side. The bevel allows the rear panel to slide into the extrusion so both sides can fit within the back space. Place one end into the corner extrusion, swing the rest of the panel into place and slide down. Make sure you fully captured that toe kick binder. You should have that 1/8 inch gap that matches the reveal on the rest of the panels.
You can see the screw holes. We should have little marks here. We're going to try to line it up so we have to match the hole in the panel to the screw hole. These are our panel screws, so they have a flat head. That allows them to be flush to the panel itself in order for the next panel to slide in.
Once the holes are aligned, secure with the provided number 2 Robertson bit. Repeat this process for the other panels. Angle in the panel, align the holes, and secure with a 1/4 inch Robertson panel screw.
There is a profile which will be on the bottom of the top cap, and that profile will be captured by the top joint of the upper panel. So again, it'll come in and we'll slide it down into the top ILP joint. Again, there are no fasteners in this, it's just a friction fit.
Place the fan cover over the top of the fans, making sure they are all covered. If you have furniture, this is one of the last steps for your pod. Attach the bench legs with the provided bolts using the 3/8 inch driver. Then simply place the benches inside the pod. And that's it, you're done. All you have to do now is position the pod into its final location, plug it in, and enjoy.